Well, a warm welcome to you all. This video is what to do about your insulin resistance. I'm JJ, I'm a life coach and I eat mostly meat.
I'm Eric, I'm a novelist and I eat mostly meat.
Now, you may have noticed I'm a life coach, he's a novelist. We are not health professionals, but we're going to give you our perspective and our experience, our personal experience, what we have done in the past 2-3 years to work on our own insulin resistance. So take it for what it's worth.
Yeah, so what is insulin resistance?
Well, I've got a little analogy. Stay with me on this. So have you ever been in a restaurant where there's a toddler next to you, maybe jumping around, screaming, being very loud, and you're like, what is wrong with those parents? Why don't they do something about this toddler? Well, the truth is they live with the toddler. They've kind of become deaf to the toddler. They don't even realize how disruptive the toddler is anymore. Whereas someone who hasn't been around a toddler, that might be a lot of toddler to handle.
Like someone who's not been around a toddler might know that it's not appropriate to stand on the table.
Perhaps.
Or throw food over the booth.
Perhaps. Well, insulin resistance is a little bit like that. So when we have excess blood sugar, which many of us have for decades as we're eating the standard American diet, our insulin comes in and takes care of our blood glucose so that it doesn't get to toxic levels. Mm-hmm. But over the years, we need more and more insulin. Our body produces more and more insulin. Well, some of those cells are like those parents of the toddler. They no longer recognize the insulin because they've been flooded with it day in and day out for decades. So that is where insulin resistance comes in. However, our fat cells are always extremely sensitive. So they respond to the insulin by really doing their best to store that extra energy, that extra glucose. And how do they store it? They store it as fat. So our fat cells continue to get fatter and fatter and fatter, while the rest of our cells, our muscle cells, our brain cells are going, la, 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 la. I don't even notice you, insulin. Now, why is this bad?
Well, this is bad because high long-term elevated insulin levels leads to all kinds of diseases.
Oh, like?
Well, diabetes,
yeah,
and cancer and heart disease and all kinds of inflammatory things. So we don't want it. It's actually one of the fundamental things about metabolic syndrome, mm-hmm.
Which
I think that of the 5 elements of metabolic syndrome that would relate to it would be high blood sugar or maybe a high A1C. Mm-hmm. But high A1C is also basically telling you that your insulin is high.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
But insulin isn't generally measured. I mean, you can do a fasting insulin, but most doctors don't do it.
And a fasting insulin, while it is extremely useful information, it's a snapshot of just one section of the day.
Okay, so what do we do if we're carnivores? Mm-hmm. And we're like, in our last video, we talked about carnivores can be insulin resistant.
They can?
In our last video, you taught us that carnivores can be insulin resistant.
They can be.
Because you had been reading Gary Taub's book, and he was saying that fat cells, if they detect the slightest amount of insulin, they don't want to release their fat stores. Mm-mm. But it's different for different people. So we had a comment saying, well, what do you do about it? And we're like, oh, I guess we should have been more clear on that.
More explicit, yes.
Well, we only know what we've read and also from our own personal experience. Mm-hmm. And so when you started this journey, you didn't start even with carnivore.
I did not.
You started with intermittent fasting.
Intermittent fasting. My doctor had noticed that I was experiencing some metabolic syndrome, especially noted through weight gain and the inability, like rapid weight gain and the inability to lose weight. And other hormonal issues were along with that. So he suggested that I use an eating window and that I eat between 6 to 8 hours a day, keep my food consumption within that window.
No. You're not eating 6 to 8 hours a day. You're eating within a period of 6 to 8 hours.
That's a good point. It was not a country kitchen all day smorgasbord. No. But that I restricted
Yes.
my eating within that time frame. And this was to allow my blood sugar and thus my insulin to come down during the other portion of the day, to give it a long enough time to process all the glucose in my system and come down. Now, what I found was 8 hours did not work for me at all. 6 hours, I started to notice some benefits like reduced allergies, that some of the inflammation in my body was healing, but I still was not losing weight. My insulin was not getting low enough. And that is when I moved to carnivore and cutting my carbs almost completely out.
And I would say this is actually the more direct step to take. But since we're talking to carnivores already, the assumption is you're either keto, ketovore, carnivore-esque, carnivore-ish,
Yes.
carnivorific.
I like that.
But any of those esque-ish, ific, ketovore, keto could have enough carbs to be a problem. And this is why the most direct experiment, from my point of view, would be high-fat carnivore,
Yes.
no carbs.
Yes. And you may need to track for a day or two to see if you're getting some sneaky carbs, especially through dairy.
Yeah, dairy would be the 1A to this point, because there are carbs in dairy. Like, for instance, there's a popular carnivore flatbread, which
Yes.
uses cottage cheese.
Yes.
Cottage cheese is not without carbs. There's a significant number of them in there. And while it's delicious, especially with the everything bagel seasoning, it may require an experiment to not have those. If you were already been carnivore for a while and weight loss has not showed up and you're still having dairy, that would be the number one thing to drop.
And heavy cream has a certain amount of carbs too. It's less than 1 gram per serving, I believe, tablespoon.
It's hard for some people because they're coffee, which I think you can probably still have in carnivore, but my carnivore card was removed from my possession because of it.
Yeah.
So I am not actually authorized to approve coffee. But if you have to have cream in your coffee, you could try to substitute butter.
You could, and just be mindful of how much cream you're putting in, because if you're putting in 2 servings, which I believe is 2 tablespoons, I'm not sure, you're over a carb there.
That's a whole carb.
That's more than a carb. Well,
That's one whole entire carb.
but again, we're looking for those sneaky carbs.
Treat everything as an experiment. Have a mental view of curiosity, exploration. You have to tune it. 2, no snacking between meals. Why?
Dr. Annette Bosworth says this the best. She's learned to use the word bolus, which is kind of a weird word. But when we say, okay, I'm only having 1 or 2 meals a day, we think of a meal as maybe you sit down, you're eating a plate full of food. But then people tend to snack throughout the day. Maybe they're having some jerky and some nuts and, well, not on carnivore nuts, but ketovore, you might be having some nuts. You might be chewing gum. So you're putting something into your system several times a day, keeping that insulin raised through a prolonged period of time with every snack, every bite of food, every drink of diet soda, or even stevia sweetened electrolytes. So she likes to say, no, we're not talking meals, we're talking boluses. So every time you put something into your mouth, it is a bolus. And we want to pulse our insulin then, usually 2 times a day. 1, 2, some people can get away with 3, Kelly Hogan. But you're only consuming anything during those times, which again allows your blood sugar to lower, maybe not to baseline, but to lower between each of those experiences of tasting something.
Well, and that goes direct. Wait a minute. What about if you're getting a little kind of peckish and you're like, oh, I've heard I should just have a pat of butter?
that is still considered a bolus of food, I think.
Do you think a pat of butter would stimulate some insulin response?
I think it is the best option if you are really needing that pat of butter or you're really feeling peckish. The butter is the best bet because you get the least amount of insulin release. It's a very small amount with fat only. But with protein, you do get a little bit.
So we should circle back to number one, high-fat carnivore.
Yeah.
Is that if you're getting hungry and for snacks, one of the first places to look is, are you getting enough fat in the main meal?
Yes.
Because high-fat carnivore is a lot of fat.
Yes, it is a lot of fat.
I personally don't think I get enough fat in most of my meals.
I think you're right.
Because a couple hours later, I want some jerky. And I eat it.
Yes, you do.
But maybe this is convincing me to tighten down a little bit. 3, you've already mentioned it, artificial sweeteners.
Yes.
This can be hard for some people. I know Kelly said she did diet sodas for a decade before she eventually got off of them. If you're really doing these other things, you're high-fat carnivore, no dairy, no snacking, well then the artificial sweetener could be something that's bumping up your insulin slightly more.
And again, we've mentioned our fat cells are very sensitive. So we don't know what our threshold is for insulin, but for a fat cell, it's pretty low. So we don't know if that little tiny raise in insulin is what is keeping you stalled.
And if you don't consider an artificially sweetened soft drink a snack, that's a problem because that is a snack.
It is, yes.
Because the cephalic phase insulin response will release some insulin for some people at the anticipation of sweetness, the experience of sweetness, even if it's artificial. And that little insulin rise could be enough to rise above the threshold that we're talking about.
Yep.
So now, number 4, we're actually getting to where JJ started, which is time restriction.
Yes. Yes.
And so you mentioned 8 hours straight of nonstop eating was not what you meant.
No, it was not what I meant. But that was the first window I started with, was 8 hours where I was permitted food during that 8 hours. The rest of what is that, 16?
Yeah.
Yeah, 16. No food, no snacking, nothing but water.
But you slowly had to titrate that down.
I moved to 6 hours and I eliminated the snacking. So it was pretty much 2 meals, 2 boluses of food. But then this year, 2024, I took it even further and started doing some extended fasting, which we'll get to in a moment because I was still experiencing some signs of insulin resistance. So
with time restricted eating or eating window, sometimes you'll hear the phrase intermittent fasting, which isn't very precise because fasting kind of means different things.
Yeah.
So time restriction is a better way to look at it, or an eating window. There's like a 4A point to this, and that is timing your eating window to align with your circadian rhythm better.
Yes.
So talk about that.
So if you are experiencing a stall in weight loss or other signs of metabolic syndrome and you are using an eating window, you might try to move it sooner in the day. To be more aligned with our circadian rhythms, eating when it's more daylight earlier in the day seems like it's more of an ancestral way of eating, a more natural way of eating. People weren't out generally hunting at night. And it also aligns with our dawn effect, which is the raising of our blood sugar, our glucose, which naturally happens no matter how we're eating. We get a natural rise in our blood sugar around dawn to get our bodies awakened and ready for the day. And so by moving those boluses of food, those meals, closer to that, you get a longer time again to recover, to allow your blood sugar and your insulin to come down.
So we've instituted a breakfast and late lunch, which we call dunch. Some people call it dinner. So for me, I eat at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and then we eat again at 2 or 3 in the afternoon.
Yep. Yep.
And then we're done eating for the day.
By like 4 p.m.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then we have that long span of not eating. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have artificially sweetened drinks after that window,
Yes.
then your body's able to bring down those insulin levels lower and lower and lower, and get into that mode where the body's willing to release some fat to burn, because now you're carnivore, so you're fat adapted and it wants to use that as energy. Mm-hmm. So the order so far for addressing this, high fat dairy.
No.
No. High fat carnivore, no dairy, no snacking, no artificial sweeteners, time restricted aligned with circadian, so earlier in the day. Mm-hmm. And then the final sort of step in trying to solve this puzzle is to institute some longer fasts.
Yes. Now, I did this starting in 2024. Shout out to Steak and Butter Gal, Bella. I actually joined their community to sort of move into this longer term fasting. Now, when I say longer term for me, I'm talking 42, 46 hours. I'm not doing days and days of it. But what I was finding was that my blood sugar was creeping up. My A1C was creeping up on carnivore and showing signs of perhaps too much protein consumption.
Yeah.
Maybe not high enough fat. So I did add more fat and started giving my body a longer time, again, to return that baseline insulin, that baseline blood sugar, as low as I can get it between healthy, low, between meals. So during that 42, 46 hours, I am drinking water, period.
Now, when you mentioned that you'd been doing this for a while and your blood sugar started to creep up, there's going to be viewers here who instantly recognize that as something Dr. Bob Sivas has talked about and attached the term insulin suppression to.
Yeah.
And that is not a universally accepted phenomenon or distinction. Mm-hmm. He might be right.
He might be right.
I'm a novelist. I don't have any clue.
No. But that's why I've been experimenting with it. Again, it's an experiment.
My point was that his advice then is to add back a little carbs to the diet, which seems counterintuitive, but that's not something you've attempted.
Not intentionally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the problem is you add back the carbs and then you start adding back all of the problems the carbs had solved heretofore.
Yeah.
Okay, so that we have some extra credit. And maybe they shouldn't be considered extra credit. But the first one is exercise. And I wouldn't even consider, I'm not even talking about going to the gym type of exercise. Doing a long walk would be helpful in lowering blood sugar and therefore insulin. And making a daily habit of getting some form of motion into the body.
And it's especially helpful if it's within a certain amount of time after eating.
When people hear exercise, they immediately flash to The Biggest Loser.
Yes.
And the horrific torture that they put those contestants through on that show to try to beat them into some sort of a submission for lulz for the viewers, which we watched that show pretty loyally for many years until people got too thin and ill looking at the end. But I'm talking about exertion. That means getting out, going for a walk with the dogs, or whatever it is relative to your norm. So it could be, depending on how unfit you are and the state of your health, it might be standing up and then sitting back down and then standing up. It might be shadow boxing on the sofa. It's just finding that one level higher. And doing it for an increasing amount of time. Plus, there's huge mental health benefits to exercise. And then eventually you can get into some lifting heavy things and even sprinting. The next bonus is not even a bonus because It should be the number one thing of all things on any topic ever, which is sleep. Not that I have any expertise on how to do this with any success. Although last night at about 8:15 in front of the TV, I was really good at it. You kind of helped out too.
Oh yeah, it was.
You kind of snorfled, and I'm like, wait a minute, you're not watching this either.
It's a rare night I fall asleep.
But Dr. Boz talks about sleep and insulin.
All of the above?
All the above. I'm looking at you because I felt like we just talked about this last time.
I don't remember what we said last time. It's a distinct
But we do know that if you get less sleep than normal, your blood sugar tends to be higher.
It does. Yes. Yes. And so it's about doing what you can to get sleep, to get a good amount of sleep.
A lot of these things are intertwined. So we list them as sort of like the hierarchy of how you would, like the order of the experiment you would do. But you may have to solve some of these before sleep really works, because that's how it has happened with me. It's kind of hard to do exercise when you're so exhausted because you're not sleeping. And that is a chicken egg thing, because sometimes you need the exercise to help the sleep. And sometimes you need the sleep to help the exercise. I wish that it was more straightforward than that, but it isn't. And that's why having that spirit of curiosity and exploration, experimentation is so essential. You have this life and you have these hours of these days, and you can decide to do experiments and see what works. And anytime something doesn't work, you can consider it something you've learned. And when it does work, then it's a tool that you've gained in your path towards mastery.
I love what you just said. It really is a mindset thing. When I look at it and approach it from an experiment, it is a huge benefit to me mentally than thinking, oh, this isn't working. I can't believe this. I've been doing this for this long, and what? My blood sugar, I can't believe my blood sugar is rising. It's really about optimizing and experimenting.
So of the things we've mentioned, high fat carnivore, no dairy, no snacking, no artificial sweeteners, time restricted eating, water fasting, getting exercise, sleep, are any one of those the thing that tipped you over the edge from not losing weight to losing weight? If that happened, put it in the comments so that other people who come by can skim that and go, oh, this was the thing for this person. And so maybe I just haven't found my one thing that I need to do yet. All right. Is that it?
I think that's it.
Bye.